Mitch Halverson watched Shane Lawson step out of a pickup whose paint had faded into 3 shades of red and 1 shade of rust, and he made the same fast calculation he had made about her for almost 30 years. Small operator, cash flow tight, probably here to ask about used parts, maybe trade talk, definitely financing. He had done this long enough to trust his first read on people, and Clay County had trained him to sort buyers by boots, truck, and timing, and she had never once looked like the kind of customer who bought a late-model combine with a check. He walked her past 2 used machines and toward a newer Class 7 combine with a listed price of $312,000. He talked rates before she asked because that conversation usually ended quickly with people like her. 6.1% fixed over 7 years, first payment deferred until after harvest. No prepayment penalty after year 3. Shane listened without interrupting, one hand on the rail ladder, eyes on the feeder house chain, checking where most buyers never looked. Mitch shifted to a friendlier tone and said they could probably work something out if she had 10% down. She said, "No note?" and set a cashier's check on his desk for $312,000 even, tax handled through her farm account the same day. He did not speak for a full breath. The woman he had once warned against buying an 18,000-bushel grain bin when she farmed 210 leased acres, had just paid cash for the machine he expected to finance for almost anyone else in the county. He remembered exactly what he told her in 1987, that storage that big only made sense for people already scaled, and she would tie up money she needed for operating expense. She had nodded, signed anyway, and left with a bin crew scheduled for Monday morning. He asked one practical question, because now the curiosity had moved past pride. He asked if she wanted to discuss service package terms. She said she had run the numbers and would take the 3-year service plan for $8,400, paid up front, because downtime cost more than coverage. That answer landed harder than the check, because it sounded like every decision she had ever made, plain, unemotional arithmetic first. The room changed in a way nobody needed to name. To understand why that moment mattered, and why Mitch's face looked like a man rereading a map he thought he knew by memory, the story has to go back to Clay County in 1983, when Shane came home from a short stint in Kearney, leased exactly 210 acres, planted corn and soybeans on ground she did not own, and carried one rule she inherited from her father, Earl Lawson, a rule he had learned the hard way from someone else's loss. Own what keeps you alive in a bad year, because lenders collect in bad years the same way they collect in good ones. Earl never gave speeches about money, and he never framed himself as wise. He had one story, told the same way every time, about standing at a foreclosure auction in the 1970s, where a neighbor's machinery sold below value while the auctioneer kept pace with a docket. Number 1 could slow down. Earl remembered the sound first, bid numbers snapping across cold air, and the sound carried more weight than any lesson. He told Shane that debt looked manageable, right up to the year weather and price moved against each other, because that was the year a paper plan became a legal process. He did not condemn neighbors who borrowed. He said some made it work. He said survival required margin for the year nobody could schedule. By 1983, Shane had 210 leased acres, a used planter, an older tractor, and enough working capital to farm if nothing broke at the wrong time. She sold at harvest because she needed operating cash, and that pattern kept her liquid while trapping her at the weakest marketing window. Fall basis in her elevator corridor ran soft during pressure weeks, and she knew exactly how much value she left on the table each year. The obstacle was simple and severe. She could not delay sales without storage, and she could not build storage without spending money she was told to keep for flexibility. Every season repeated that squeeze. In 1986, she began collecting hard numbers from elevator settlement sheets and local bids. She logged harvest cash bids against January and March bids, tracked basis movement, and stripped out wishful thinking. The spread varied and weather years changed timing, yet the average improvement on grain she could have held came to $0.38 per bushel. She ran the math at kitchen table scale, legal pad, and coffee ring level, and circled one sentence in pencil. If she could store roughly 15,000 bushels per year, the likely gain approached $5,700 before extra drying and handling costs. She estimated net gain near $4,800 in conservative years. That estimate created a decision pressure she could not ignore. A used 18,000 bushel bin system became available from a retiring operator outside Fairfield, with usable aeration and unload equipment, and the seller wanted removal included. Installed with site work, wiring, and concrete, total cost reached $23,400. Her acreage looked too small for that footprint in local eyes. Mitch was the loudest voice saying it out loud. He told her she was tying up scarce capital in steel when she should keep cash open for crop inputs. He was speaking from standard practice, and in ordinary years, standard practice had logic. Shane's hesitation had one center. If she spent $23,400 and got a short crop year, she could tighten operating cash at planting and lose flexibility when she needed it. She solved that hesitation by cutting living draw for 2 seasons, selling a second pickup she barely used, and pre-buying fewer discretionary inputs. The purchase happened in 1987 as a cash deal. She signed the work order, accepted the jokes, and watched crews bolt up sheet metal while neighbors slowed on the gravel road to count rings and guess wrong about who was backing the note. No bank backed it. The check cleared from her account. The first full harvest through that bin answered the question she cared about. Her corn came out dry enough to hold with fan management, soybean lots stayed segregated, and she sold portions across winter and spring rather than dumping all volume in October. Cash flow fear did not disappear. It got managed by planning instead of urgency. She set minimum cash targets for inputs and delayed only what she could afford to delay. That first cycle turned a theory into habit, and habit opened the next gate, because annual storage gains stopped being occasional luck and started becoming retained earnings. From 1988 through 1996, the ledger built in years, not slogans. In 1988, she stored 14,600 bushels and captured about $0.34 per bushel after accounting for spread timing, netting just under $5,000 and remembering the smell of warm fan air in November. In 1989, she held 15,200 bushels, captured near $0.41, net around $6,200, and paid cash for a used gravity wagon she found at a retirement sale. In 1990, weather-cut yields, stored volume fell to 12,900 bushels, net gain about $3,700, and she still met spring operating targets. In 1991, she stored 16,100 bushels, net gain around $5,900, and replaced auger flighting before failure. In 1992, she stored 15,800 bushels, net near $5,600, and attended Earl's funeral with a pocket notebook, where he had penciled auction prices for 3 decades. In 1993, heavy weather delays pushed marketing windows. She stored 14,200 bushels, with net gain around $4,900, and learned patience in muddy spring roads. In 1994, yields improved. 16,700 bushels moved through storage, net about $6,400, and she set aside a separate land fund account. In 1995 and 1996, with similar volume and steady spreads, she added roughly $11,800 combined to that land fund. By sale day, in 1997, document storage net transfers since 1988 totaled about $49,300, and that margin stack formed the core of the $71,680 down payment once her other retained cash was added. The line moved slowly, steadily, and visibly. By 1997, an auction listed 160 acres she had watched for years, ground with drainage she understood, and access she could work efficiently from existing routes. The sale price landed at $1,120 per acre, total $179,200. She entered with financing prearranged and one ceiling number in mind because emotion at auctions inflates fast. She put down 40%, exactly $71,680, and financed $107,520 on a fixed 15-year note at 8.25%. The scheduled annual payment by amortization came to approximately $12,800, and she built her operating plan around paying more than schedule whenever marketing and yields allowed. The moment she won the bid did not feel triumphant. It felt heavy, because debt on land carries longer memory than debt on equipment. She walked to her truck, wrote projected payments on an envelope, and identified the specific obstacle she needed to eliminate. If she let annual payment discipline slide for one easy year, the note would shape decisions for 15. She made an internal rule that every storage season had two jobs now: capture basis and carry gains, and push principal down while rates were fixed and cash was available. That rule gave direction to each post-harvest check. Around her, Dale Mercer represented the other logic that looked stronger in good markets. Dale was a capable operator, early adopter, and willing to scale quickly when lenders and dealers encouraged acreage growth. Rita Mercer, his wife, kept books with clean discipline and no denial about risk, and she could explain any line item to the dollar. Through the late 1990s and early 2000s, their operation expanded faster than Shane's, and locally that speed read as success because it was success in those years. More acres farmed, newer machinery reliability, stronger gross checks in high-yield season. Shane never argued with them. She bought used where practical, fixed what still had service life, and kept principal reduction ahead of schedule. Mitch saw those differences from his sales office and interpreted them through his own metrics. Dale upgraded more often, financed larger packages, and looked like a growth customer. Shane purchased less frequently and negotiated hard on used inventory, and from the dealer's side, she looked cautious to a fault. His old comment about her being too small for that 1987 bin kept resurfacing whenever storage came up in conversation. She never corrected him because correction required a debate she did not need. Her settlements and bank statements already answered the question privately, which was the only place she required certainty. Between 1998 and 2003, she made every scheduled land payment and added principal in years where storage margins and yields allowed extra cash. One year she paid $12,800 scheduled, plus $9,000 extra principal. Another year she added $11,500 extra principal after spring basis, strengthened on corn lots she had held. The note balance declined faster than the original amortization path. Pressure from neighbors to expand acreage with borrowed money rose during strong commodity stretches, since high prices made leverage appear efficient and disciplined debt look outdated. She stayed on the same track because the unresolved obstacle remained unchanged. She wanted land ownership that could survive a zero-income year. In 2004, she cleared the remaining payoff balance of $63,000 and closed the mortgage 8 years early. The check came from retained earnings, not a refinance, and the title recording happened quietly, without celebration. One practical door opened immediately. Debt service that would have consumed roughly $12,800 each year stayed inside the operation as liquidity. She directed part of that liquidity into a reserve account and part into planned maintenance, because paid-off land still requires cash discipline to stay productive. Her social standing did not change much, and she seemed fine with that, since status never penciled into her budgets. The county entered a run of high-confidence years where expansion through leverage looked validated daily. Land values climbed, machinery prices climbed with them, and input costs climbed in tandem, while yields were generally supportive. Dale and Rita used debt the way many prudent operators used it, with spreadsheets, hedging plans, and lender meetings scheduled before problems arrived, and in the good years those plans worked, which is why so many people copied them. Their books showed healthy growth while margins held, and that visible success made caution look outdated across town. Shane looked increasingly conservative by comparison, especially driving the same truck and running equipment that passed through her shop more often than through dealerships. This contrast mattered, because confidence creates social pressure more effectively than criticism. Nobody needed to insult Shane by that point. People simply assumed she was missing upside. She heard versions of the same suggestion at coffee counters and seed meetings: expand faster, roll equity into more acres, use low-rate loans while money is cheap. She listened and returned to her own numbers. The unresolved question from Earl's story still governed her risk frame. What happens when price, yield, and credit tighten together? She had no forecast for when that would happen. She planned as if timing did not matter. By 2008 and into 2009, the margin structure changed sharply. Credit tightened, lenders reevaluated collateral assumptions, and commodity volatility compressed breathing room for operators carrying heavy fixed obligations. Land did not collapse uniformly, yet liquidity shocks in specific parcels and families forced sales below previous peak expectations. Input commitments made during optimistic planning cycles collided with weaker realized margins, and refinance conversations turned from growth planning to survival triage. That environment answered Shane's long-held stress test in real time. She had no long-term land debt and substantial liquid reserves. Many neighbors had scale and skill, yet less room when payment schedules could not pause. Dale and Rita's books showed the problem early. Their operation remained technically viable on paper if grain moved favorably and if lenders extended terms across multiple notes. One weak season might be survivable. A second hit made the structure brittle because the same leverage that had produced visible gains in strong years fixed too many obligations in place when margins compressed. In 2009, they entered a painful restructure that preserved operations temporarily while requiring sale of selected parcels and machinery. They did not fail from laziness or bad character. They got caught in a leverage profile that offered speed in strong years and demanded too much flexibility in a year that gave none. Rita said later that the hardest line item was uncertainty, because every plan depended on someone else's signature. As distressed listings increased in 2010, Shane faced a different obstacle: fear of overreaching during someone else's hardship. She resolved that hesitation with a rule she could defend ethically and financially. She would buy only parcels she could operate efficiently, pay full auction terms without exploiting delayed settlements, and keep enough reserves for 2 wheat crop years after purchase. Under that rule, she bought 240 acres in 2010 at $2,050 per acre. Total $492,000, paid cash at closing. That purchase looked aggressive to people who still pictured her as a small operator. Her balance sheet had prepared for this exact window. The 2010 acquisition shifted her operating footprint and created the next decision. Additional acres increased gross revenue potential, yet they also increased machinery and labor timing pressure. She resisted buying new equipment immediately, choosing to optimize logistics first, hire seasonal help during harvest peaks, and maintain existing machines hard. 2 years of stable performance on the larger footprint gave her confidence that expansion remained controlled rather than reactive. When another parcel came available in 2013, 120 acres at $2,400 per acre, total $288,000, she purchased cash again and folded it into rotations with minimal disruption. Those 2 cash purchases, $492,000 in 2010 and $288,000 in 2013, triggered quiet recalibration across the community. People who had read Shane as undercapitalized began asking different questions, usually private and practical, about grain marketing windows, reserve targets, and prepayment discipline. She still did not lecture. She shared settlement math when asked and skipped theory when not asked. Mitch noticed the shift from the dealership floor long before that $312,000 combine check landed on his desk, since customers he considered growth-focused started mentioning her storage strategy in conversations about financing risk. The old thread from 1987 resolved completely only when Mitch had to reconcile memory with facts. Back then, he had told her she was too small to tie up $23,400 in an 18,000-bushel bin system. 3 decades later, she had used that same storage spine and disciplined cash management to eliminate debt, buy land in downturn years, and pay cash for machinery without fanfare. His response changed from condescension to respect in concrete behavior. Cleaner pricing, no assumptions, no financing push unless she requested it. He sold her what she asked for, exactly how she asked for it. Through this whole stretch, the 1987 bin never became a museum piece. It stayed a working asset that needed attention, and people who asked how long an old shell could really last were asking a fair operational question. Floors age, unload components wear, motors fail when dust and heat get enough seasons, so she treated upkeep as routine cost of ownership rather than a one-time rescue. By 2018, inspection found a weakening fan motor and floor corrosion patch near unload area. Replacement proposals came with financing options and persuasive brochures for larger systems. She priced repair first. New fan motor, targeted floor patch, and labor came in around $6,900, keeping original shell in service. She chose repair, paid cash, and reset maintenance intervals because debt for replacement did not improve her actual bottleneck at current throughput. That maintenance decision solved one operational tension and opened another social one. People equate older infrastructure with financial strain, and a repaired 1987 bin can look like inability rather than intention. Shane accepted that misread the same way she had accepted earlier misreads, by refusing to buy optics. Her objective remained throughput and margin capture, not appearance. In harvest seasons after 2018, the bin ran reliably with updated airflow and monitoring checks, proving that maintenance discipline can outperform replacement debt when core capacity still matches the farm's logistics. The shell remained original. The strategy remained current. By 2020, another challenge entered from a different generation. Noah Jimenez, first-generation farmer without inherited land, had skill and work ethic and very limited collateral. He could raise crops well on rented acres, yet he hit a structural barrier familiar to anyone without family land equity. Operating loans came expensive. Lease terms stayed short, and one weather shock could erase years of progress. Shane saw him do careful work and recognized the same capital gap she had navigated in earlier decades. She offered a lease on part of her ground at a stable rate, tied to realistic yield assumptions, not peak market opportunism. Noah's lease stabilized his planning horizon, which made input buying smarter and marketing less desperate. He still lacked a path to ownership, and that unresolved obstacle mattered because permanent insecurity drives short-term decisions. In 2022, an 80-acre parcel bordering his rented blocks came up for sale. Purchase price reached $520,000, beyond his immediate financing capacity, even with bank participation. Shane structured a no-interest bridge arrangement for $120,000 over 4 years, secured with clear terms and recorded documentation, allowing Noah to close with conventional financing for the remaining amount. He made every payment on schedule through 2024 and held title to his first 80 acres. Rita Mercer faced a different barrier after the 2009 restructure years reshaped their family operation. Dale shifted out of ownership and into custom grain hauling, steady work with lower capital exposure, while Rita kept books for several local farms and managed household finances with tight discipline. A difficult season in the early 2020s left her short on operating cash for a side acreage arrangement she was trying to keep viable. Bank terms came with rates and covenants that reduced flexibility she needed for timing. Shane extended a no-interest operating loan of $60,000 for one season, documented clearly, repaid after harvest settlements as agreed. That loan did more than cover inputs. It preserved Rita's autonomy during a period when dependence on high-cost credit could have forced another retreat. Dale's custom hauling business, stabilized by contracted routes and lower debt burden, began producing consistent household cash flow by 2023. Rita completed repayment on Shane's terms and continued bookkeeping work with reputation intact. The Mercer stories settled into a new form that looked smaller from the highway and healthier in the ledger, and they spoke openly about that trade-off without pretending the transition had been painless. Earl Lawson's role in all this remained present through memory rather than scenes. Shane still carried his auction notebook, now with updated pages tucked inside, and his caution about debt never hardened into fear of investment. She took risk repeatedly. She simply took risk where downside did not include forced surrender of the base operation. Buying a bin in 1987 was risk. Buying land in 1997 with a fixed note was risk. Buying during distressed years in 2010 and 2013 was risk. The pattern was never avoidance of uncertainty. The pattern was choosing uncertainties she could survive without asking permission to keep farming. By harvest 2024, the operation had grown to 1,030 acres total, with 520 acres owned and 510 acres rented under agreements she could manage without overextension. The original 1987 bin still filled every fall, exactly as the title promise requires, now one piece in a broader storage and handling system whose rhythm she knew by sound. Corn came in from owned ground and rented parcels, moisture checks dictated fan runs, and the same steel shell from 1987 held grain while markets moved toward better winter and spring opportunities. The visible image looked unchanged. The underlying balance sheet told the real story. Her 2024 net worth stood at $4,860,000, debt-free. The figure came from assets with clear valuation logic. Roughly 520 owned acres valued near prevailing county ranges, machinery and trucks at conservative resale values, stored grain inventory at harvest-marked pricing, and cash reserves built through decades of retained earnings. Liabilities on long-term land and equipment sat at zero, because no long-term notes remained after the 2004 payoff, and later acquisitions were cash. The number was specific and grounded, and it functioned as a verdict on a philosophy she never bothered to market as philosophy. People who measured wealth by visible consumption still had room to misread her if they wanted. The truck stayed old. Work jackets stayed repaired. Office furniture stayed plain. The difference from earlier decades was that nobody conducting business with her could sustain the old assumptions once paperwork reached the table. Title records, settlement sheets, and cashier's checks corrected the record without one speech. Mitch's shift captured that social correction in miniature, because he moved from dismissing her scale in 1987 to transacting with professional respect after seeing the arithmetic that had accumulated while he was watching other signals. Noah's trajectory showed how accumulated security can widen opportunity for someone else. With the $120,000 no-interest bridge structured to close his financing gap, he avoided predatory terms and built equity on 80 acres by 2024, while continuing to lease ground from Shane under stable agreements. He hired one seasonal employee from town during harvest, paid on time, and started his own reserve account. His position remained early and vulnerable in agricultural terms, yet the difference between permanent renter insecurity and first-step ownership was concrete. Capital structure changed what choices he could make in dry years and in wet ones. Rita and Dale reached a different kind of stability. Dale's custom hauling business no longer carried land note exposure, which reduced upside in booms and lowered risk in contractions. Rita kept expanding bookkeeping services for local operations that respected her precision after seeing how she handled crisis years with honesty. Their marriage absorbed stress that had broken other households during the margin squeeze era, and their resolution mattered because it rejected shame narratives. They had followed advice that looked rational in prevailing conditions, paid a severe price when conditions shifted, and rebuilt around what could be sustained. Mitch remained at the dealership, older and less certain about reading balance sheets by Boots and trucks. He still sold finance packages where financing fit, and he stopped framing debt as default intelligence. The county economy needed equipment dealers and lenders, and he understood that better after living through cycles that punished overconfidence. His relationship with Shane settled into mutual professionalism. When she called for parts, he prioritized the order because she paid promptly and maintained equipment meticulously. And when she asked for price, he gave the straight number first. No theater about what someone like her could afford. Shane herself reached the ending without changing personality for narrative effect. She stayed concise in conversation, did her own inspections, and kept records detailed enough that any number in her operation could be traced to a ticket, invoice, or title file. She did not become publicly philosophical in retirement speeches because she did not retire from decision-making, and because her philosophy had always been procedural rather than rhetorical. Every fall, she still watched grain hit the original bin floor from the spout and listened for airflow consistency at dusk, the same checks she made decades earlier when the steel was new. The moral center of the story sits in arithmetic, and the arithmetic stayed consistent across 40 years. In 1987, she spent $23,400 cash on an 18,000 bushel bin when she farmed 210 leased acres and looked too small to people grading farms by appearance. She captured an average storage advantage of $0.38 per bushel through disciplined marketing windows from 1988 through 1996, and those retained margins accumulated into the land fund that supplied the core cash for her $71,680 down payment on 160 acres in 1997. She carried a $107,520 fixed note at 8.25%, prepaid aggressively, and cleared $63,000 remaining balance in 2004, 8 years early. When credit stress hit in 2009 and liquidity forced sales in parts of Clay County, she bought 240 acres in 2010 at $2,050 per acre. Cash and 120 acres in 2013 at $2,400 per acre cash, because her earlier discipline had left her liquid when others were negotiating extensions. In 2018, she repaired the bin's fan motor and floor patch instead of borrowing for replacement, preserving capacity with a $6,900 maintenance decision and answering the old question about whether aging steel could still earn its keep. By 2024, she operated 1,030 acres, held a net worth of $4,860,000, and used that security to extend targeted, no-interest support where it changed outcomes for Rita and Noah without placing her own operation at risk. The title line about that bin still being full every fall carries more than nostalgia. It marks a repeated proof. Each full cycle confirms that a tool purchased under social doubt can keep compounding value when maintained and integrated into a clear strategy. Steel by itself does nothing. Steel aligned with patient marketing, conservative living draw, principled discipline, and refusal to perform wealth creates optionality that only becomes visible during stress years. Shane never framed it this way at public meetings. She filled bins, paid balances, bought when terms made sense, and helped others when help could be structured to last. Late in the 2024 harvest, Noah brought a truckload in after dark and asked one practical question while waiting on the auger line. He asked how she decided which opportunities to ignore. She looked at the monitor for a long second and said, "If a bad year can take it from you, price it different." That was all. No lecture followed. He nodded because the sentence carried the weight of deeds, not style. The bin fan kept running. Grain leveled under the spreader. The same shell that drew laughs in 1987 held another fall's crop while the county lights came on beyond the section line. Earl's caution had moved through one life into the next without turning rigid. Dale and Rita had rebuilt with dignity after leverage exposed them to a cycle they could not outwork. Mitch had revised his assumptions in public commerce, which is where assumptions matter most. Noah had crossed from talented renter to first-step owner through a financing bridge designed to remove one barrier without creating a new trap. Shane had done what she always did, letting numbers carry meaning while appearances stayed plain enough for anyone to underestimate her one more time. The legacy question in Clay County got answered in working terms, not plaques, since Noah's ownership path and Rita's stabilized operation were already in motion while she was still farming. By season end, every character's path had a concrete resting place. Shane Lawson remained debt-free, farming and filling the 1987 bin each fall on a 1,030-acre operation. Earl Lawson remained gone, his debt caution preserved in decisions that outlived him. Mitch Halverson continued selling equipment, now treating Shane as the cash buyer she had become long ago. Dale Mercer hauled grain as a custom operator with steadier risk. Rita Mercer kept books, repaid her no-interest loan, and stabilized her side acreage plan. Noah Jimenez owned his first 80 acres and kept growing under leases designed for endurance. The record corrected itself the way it always does in this part of the world. One harvest, one payment, one full bin at a time.